I think there's an important point that we really need to focus back on, and it's on the publication of a book by Charles Darwin. You ever hear this book? Origin of Species. You know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, I'm not going to tell you that, Charles Darwin caused racism. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that evolution caused racism. Not saying that in the least. But it's interesting the impact that this belief system has had on the culture. Here's the original full title: On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races. Ooh, favored races in the struggle for life. Are you seeing a problem already? What's that telling us? Same thing that my grandmother thought. Carl, you can't marry her. You're white. You're up here. She's Asian. She's further down the evolutionary chain. Blacks are down here closer to the missing link. Asians, Hispanics are somewhere in between. Some races are better than others. That's what this is a teaching of. It absolutely teaches that you start with some single-celled organism and given enough time, right circumstances, everything that we see on this planet just happened to come along, and that some of us races are a little bit better than others. Now, again, I'm not telling you that he caused racism, but a belief in the fact that there are favored races, some better than others, sure exploded this issue. Don't trust me. Let me let the non-Christian talk to you. And this is what he says. Biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. You see, Darwin didn't create evolution, and he didn't create racism, but he popularized a mechanism to start disliking folks that had a different skin tone, different eye shape, because we could categorize them. We're here, they're there. By the way, the man that made this quote was not a Christian and not a creationist. He was probably about as ardent anti-Christian creationist as you can get. How about this? It doesn't matter how many different races there are in the world. Here's what the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology had to say. The tendency to be prejudiced is a form of common sense hardwired in the human brain. Oh, it's just hardwired in us. That's why we're prejudiced. Can I ask you a question? If the reason we're prejudiced is because it's hardwired in us, is there anything that we can do about it? It's just the way it is. Nothing we can do about it. If it's sin, can we do something about it? Oh yeah. If it's sin, you can repent. And it's sin to be prejudiced. Because we adopted this thinking, because we adopted this wisdom, do you know what happened? It doesn't matter how many different races there are in the world today. The Australian Aboriginals were hunted like animals. They had manuals on how to hunt them down. They were skinned. Their skins were sent back to the museums and stuffed and put on display. Heads cut off, boiled down so they could have the skulls to study. Between 5,000 and 10,000 graves were dug up, desecrated, so they could have the bones to study because, you see, they're not human. They're the missing link or the closest living relative to the missing link. Oh, if you can dehumanize something, you can get away with a lot. By the way, have we heard that about the unborn child? Oh, that's not a human. It's going through a fish stage. It's going through a pig stage. It's a piece of flesh. From the point of conception, we are human beings created in the image of God. Don't let the world lie to you. The bones of these folks are still in the museums in England. I spoke there in England, and this article came out and it said this. The scientists, read the bottom line there, scientists here are concerned that if these bones go back, their value for scientific research will be lost forever. The scientists don't want to give the bones back because they're going to lose valuable scientific research. These are human beings. Hey, by the way, they're consistent with their worldview. If evolution is true, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with it. We're here, they're there. They are consistent with their worldview, even though they're wrong. The study of anthropology really took off here in America in 1904 in St. Louis at the World's Fair. A man named William McGee brought over all the different people groups that he could. He brought them over. He had Eskimos. He had Filipinos. He had Ainu, the Japanese. He had all these different people groups, and they made their little villages, and people paid money to go in to see them. Mr. McGee was a racist, period. The main reason he did what he did was to show the superiority of the white race. They also, at the same time as the World's Fair, they had the Olympics going on in St. Louis, and so they also then took and had an ethnic Olympics to coincide with the real Olympics, and they had folks out there chucking spears and chucking rocks, showing the superiority of the white race. One of the groups that they brought over were a group of pygmies. These were one of the most popular exhibits going, the pygmies. Well, the most popular pygmy of them all was a guy named Ota Benga. Ota Benga was very popular because he had those teeth, and they said, oh, he's a cannibal. He wasn't a cannibal. He was actually bought out of slavery. His wife and child had been killed. Man who bought him was a missionary in Africa, bought him out of slavery, brought him over to the United States. He went to the World's Fair, was very popular. People paid him money so that they could see his teeth. Well, after the World's Fair was over, he went back to Africa. He was with the missionary. Well, he got married, had another child, but the wife died from a snake bite, child died. And so when the missionary decided to return to America, Ota Benga said, hey, I want to go back. I want to learn how to read. He came back. But the missionary ran out of money. So he had to find somebody to help him take care of Ota Benga. And he did. He finally did find somebody. In the Bronx. Yeah, New York. The zoo. He was put on display with the orangutans. He was the most popular exhibit of the day until Bible-believing Christians stood up and said, this is wrong. It doesn't matter how many different races are in the world today. I beg to differ. I spoke in Georgia not too long ago. Headlines from Georgia. I'm talking here recent. Interred in all-white cemetery. A South Georgia infant remained interred in an all-white cemetery Thursday after church officials backed off their request that she be exhumed because her father is black and her mother white. They wanted to dig up the child from the church cemetery. Doesn't matter how many different races there are in the world. Listen to this. This is what the church officials told her. They don't allow half-breeds to be buried in their cemetery. The deacon said, this isn't a matter of racism, it's just the way it's always been. This is a Southern Baptist church, it's been like this since 1856. Well, I got to tell you, I attend a Southern Baptist church. And I don't care what denomination you are. If you believe this, you've been wrong since 1856. It matters how many different races there are in the world today. Eugenics, Charles Darwin's second cousin, Francis Galton, is the one that came up with this term. Carl, you're talking about ugly, heavy things. We have to. If we don't talk about them, trust me when I say this, we are sending our children to the secular education system that is loving to get these Christian kids in there that can't give an answer for the reason for the hope that lies within them, and they're chewing them up and they're spitting them out. I didn't know any of this when I started in the ministry just 5 years ago. I didn't know any of this. We're not being taught what happened. We have to accept the fact that we made mistakes and then deal with it. Charles Darwin's second cousin came up with that term, eugenics. What's eugenics? Well, you can see their original artwork there. Eugenics is a self-direction of human evolution. And you look at that strong tree, that strong science of eugenics, and look at all the roots that make it up. I mean, you've got anatomy, biology, genetics, anthropology. Oh, looky here, the bottom right. What's that one say? Religion. You can go to the internet if you wish and download the sermons that were being preached from the pulpit about whites. We're up here. We're more highly evolved than the blacks who are down here. We were preaching it and teaching it, and by the way, still are, from the pulpits. You know, it's an interesting thing. How did we get there? Let a man give you, this is an interesting quote. This isn't Carl Kirby giving this to you. This is a quote from someone within the scientific community. One reason the religious eugenics movement was so large was because evangelical scholars were among the first to embrace Darwin's theory of evolution. The religious community bought off on it, and as a consequence, and did so well in advance of its widespread acceptance by the scientific community. Because we bought off on the belief system of the favored races, we started preaching it. We started living it. Think about this. The goal was to immediately sterilize 14 million people and millions more worldwide, the lower tenth, and then continuously eradicate the remaining lowest tenth until only a pure Nordic super race remained. What country am I talking about? Leaders of the ophthalmology profession conducted a long and chilling political campaign to round up and coercively sterilize every person with a vision problem. I want you to think about this. You wearing glasses? Contacts. Had LASIK surgery. Oh, you don't get to slip by. Snip, no kids for you. You don't let defective cattle breed. Why in the world should we let defective hominids breed? What country are we talking about? Ultimately, 60,000 plus were sterilized, coercively sterilized. What do I mean by coercively sterilized? You're put in jail until you're beyond the age of breeding, unless you voluntarily agree to be sterilized then we'll let you out. 60,000 plus sterilized minimum. Church after church after church that I ask these questions give me the same response every time. Well, that's simple. Germany. Sorry. All of this churned throughout America years before the Third Reich rose in Germany. We did the research. Hitler took it, implemented it, and killed the millions of Jews, and killed also, hey, it's not just Jewish folks that were killed. It was Christians, it was gypsies, it was mentally, physically handicapped. Because you see, some were just useless eaters. And if you're a useless eater, you get rid of them. He took the research we did. I understand why my grandmother thinks the way that she does. I really do. Listen to this. During the pre-war Hitler regime, the Carnegie Institution, through its Cold Spring Harbor complex, enthusiastically propagandized for the Nazi regime and even distributed anti-Semitic Nazi Party films to American high schools. I understand why my grandmother thinks the way that she does. You see, when we accepted the fact of quote-unquote favored races, it had a profound effect on our nation. From the text when my grandmother was in school, let me read what we were teaching the young folks at that time. Mankind is divided into 5 races. The yellow and white races are extremely strong and diligent. Because the other races are feeble and stupid, they are going to be exterminated by the white race. Only the yellow race competes with that race. This is so-called evolution. No, this is racism. But this is what we were teaching in the school system. We learned the lessons very well, because you know why I can say that? 100 years ago, Indiana became the first place on the planet that you could sterilize somebody because they were unfit for procreation. Wrong race, white trash, or feeble-minded. We started in Indiana in the prisons with the males with no painkiller. We started it here in America. All these states with the dashed lines right there, every one of those states had laws on the book that you could be sterilized because you're the wrong race, white trash, or feeble-minded. Oh, by the way, the states that are totally black, their laws were pending. Oh, what do I mean by feeble-minded? How did they determine if you were feeble-minded? Pretty simple. You know how they did that? Anybody ever hear the SATs? You ever take the SATs? Where did the SATs come from? To see if you were feeble-minded or not. You didn't pass the SAT, you could have gotten sterilized. Indiana's sterilization law was on the books until 1974. North Carolina had theirs on the books till 2003, and Mississippi still has its law. I graduated high school in 1979 from Lexington, Virginia. The year that I graduated high school, between 24 and the year that I graduated high school, 1924 and 1979, 8,000 citizens were sterilized. North Carolina, the last 15 years of their program, 99% of the victims were women and more than 60% were black. 1967, my lifetime, it was against the law in 16 states for a person of 1 drop of non-white blood to marry a white person. If you married, the state came in and broke you apart. If you didn't stay apart, you went to jail. Let me ask you a question. 1930s, 40s, 50s, early 60s, was America more or less Christian than today? Let me make it easy for you. 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s, could you go into the public school classroom and the teacher have a Bible? Oh yeah, they could do that. Could they open it and read from it? Could they pray? Could you go to Walmart and say Merry Christmas and not feel like you were breaking a law? No, you couldn't. No Walmarts. But you know what I'm saying to you. You get the picture. Externally, we were a whole lot more Christian then than we are today. Then how is it that this quote-unquote Christian nation passed those laws? How could we pass those laws? You know why? Because decisions have consequences. And when we, with our lips, say, oh, it doesn't matter how many different races there are, trust me, it matters. It absolutely matters. We were inconsistent with the biblical worldview, but we were consistent with the secular worldview. With our lips we said Jesus, but with our lives, oh, white's here, black's here. You see, it matters how many different races there are in the world today. We made major mistakes in the past because we didn't trust the Word of God. And we have to accept responsibility for that. And if you're going to overcome this, because that's the next part, how do we overcome it? Well, to overcome it, you got to get the C. You got to change. We have to change